Hello there, and thank you for joining me in watching another of my films and sharing my painting. In this case we're going to do a whole series of different subjects and many different mediums and in many different ways and methods as well. I believe in the artists in having the freedom of choice to do whatever they want in the best way that they wish. So in other words, we choose the best medium and method for the subject that we use. I shall be showing you a whole plethora of paintings here, with wildlife scenes, with gardens, with water, all sorts of different ways of working, rather exciting. We'll explore watercolour, pastels, texture, oils, acrylics, and the use of mixing all of these together even. In these instances most of the work is done in the studio, but there are one or two that are done on plein air. But the main thing is that I hope you share my enthusiasm and the fun that I had, and by the end of it you'll feel excited and inspired and want to go out and try these ways and methods as well, in your own way. My own past is very much influenced by having been a part of the church, in the fact that I was 6 or 7 years an RSCM chorister, and sang and travelled to various wonderful places such as King's College, Wells Cathedral, Royal Albert Hall, and many other beautiful churches. My own tastes in music are very broad and eclectic, but I have a great fondness for church music. For 7 years I used to teach near to Beverley at Hornsey, then I moved down south. So with this past and information in mind, it's always a wonderful pleasure to get an invitation from my friend Liz to go and stay, and then go into evensong with her. Let this film and painting be dedicated to those wonderful memories and choir and beautiful minster. The next painting I'd like to do with you is a watercolour. I haven't done watercolour for a little while now, so it'd be rather fun to do one. This will be more traditional watercolour using washes and glazes and gradually building up, but I hope to leave a slight vignette around the outside to make it slightly looser there. It's going to be a very complicated one. The drawing has to be pretty good to start with. It's a subject that I did some years ago now, it must be nearly 15-20 years ago, of Beverley Minster. So I'm using some old film to show you the previous picture and how I designed and built it up in oils, and then I'm going to do this one, as I say, in watercolour on a Rough paper, but it's just off rough. It's sort of in between not and rough. I'm going to do a large scale painting this time, as I say, for fun. For security reasons, I shan't be showing much detail on the faces and so on. When I paint fairly impressionistically anyway, so I shan't be painting any child's portraits or anything else of the choristers. We have to be very careful about that these days. And the little bit of film that I do show of the actual minster will not enable you to see those faces for those reasons. They'll be kept blurred and out of focus. So let's go ahead and have some fun doing this picture, which I hope to make into some Christmas cards later, because it's a very good subject for that, and show you a way of working in between the very tight figurative out towards a slightly looser work at the edges in this beautiful medium.
And as a tradition between Liz and I, after the evensong at the Minster, Liz and I always like a good pint of bitter afterwards. And now to explain the previous painting that I did in oils of the Minster, the interior. It's quite a complicated drawing and requires some juggling with perspective. As you know, things that go away from us, to make them appear to do so, means that we have to make the lines move together in single point perspective in this case. But it's not only the vanishing point going away, there's also the height of the building, so we have to give the illusion of the height by making the lines come together as they come towards the top as well. Then we have to consider the arches as they regress towards the back, and also the tiling, which is very, very useful. If you look down on squares, they look square, but as they go away from you, they'll become narrower, and you have this perspective like railway lines or tram lines. The tiles in Beverley are not just squares, but also geometric shapes, which give an illusion of form, turning the two-dimensional shapes into three-dimensional surfaces, almost making the floor appear to come up into different blocks. Here is my basic structural design to give that feeling of space, height and depth before you see the final piece.
Before we even start this watercolour, let me take you through the materials we're going to use and the processes. This is the paper now. It's been stretched overnight. It wants drying slightly more. I've used brown tape to do so. And now I'm going to show you a piece from my earlier foundation to watercolour films on how to stretch this paper, and then we'll run through the brushes and other materials that we're going to need for producing this picture. Right, I've mentioned there are three sorts of watercolour paper: the hot press, which is the smoothest, the knot, which we say is not either, neither rough nor smooth, and then the rough, which is the roughest of all. This one's a knot, it's the one in between. Not only is there the different surfaces of the paper, there's the different weights, and the different weights are the different thicknesses. A £100 weight is adequate for nearly all work, but you can go to £200 or £300, which is almost like card. Now, when you've got a thinner paper, like £100, you need to stretch it. You need to place it onto a board to support it and stretch the paper. It's adequate with a small sheet just to put ordinary masking tape around, but with a larger sheet, you'll want to stretch it. This means put water onto it, both sides, so that the paper expands, lay it on the board, and then put gum tape over. Now the trick to this is, if you have a whole reel of gum tape, you've only got to touch the edge of the reel with a wet finger and the whole reel is ruined, because later it'll all stick together. So with dry hands, cut the tape to the lengths you want for your paper, and then have them quite separate and be prepared to put the paper under the water. There's nothing fancy to it. All we do is take our paper, run the tap, run the water over the paper both sides, as quick as that, no messing about, ever so easy to do. You can use the shower if you want. And that's it. Don't spend any more time on it. Now there is a right and a wrong side to the paper. If you have a whole sheet of watercolour paper and you hold it up, you'll see the mark. It might be Bockingford or Waterford. If you can read the mark the right way around, that is the right way up for the paper. It's a nice surface of the paper and you want to get the right side because the other side isn't quite as pleasant. You can usually recognise the surface with a little bit of experience. Place the paper down onto the board. It will start to cockle fairly quickly. Don't worry about that at all. That's what it's meant to do. Then run your paper under the tap, your gum tape under the tap, and slap it straight onto the board. Don't mess about. No need to do anything else but this. Just so simple. Straight half and half, just over the edge of the paper. Smooth it down. There.
So it really is quite a simple thing to do. Now you don't need to do this in most cases. Just ordinary masking tape on your paper will normally hold it down quite adequately. It saves a lot of hassle later if bits of paper all over the place. But if you're using a larger sheet and you want a really smooth surface, then this is the thing to do. And why? Because when you paint onto watercolour paper, the amount of wetness will cockle the watercolour paper. It will start to go all wavy and bubbly. And if you want to avoid that, then this is the way to do it, because when this is dry, it'll be as tight as a drum. And when you paint onto it, even if it cockles slightly, it will then stretch out again afterwards. Don't make the mistake, as some amateurs do, of taping it and when it's dry cutting it off. It hasn't changed the paper and it's still going to cockle just the same. You have to leave it on the board when it's dry to paint on, and you only cut it off when you've finished completely, okay? One other thing is, don't be tempted to dry it too quickly. Don't put it in front of a fan heater or a fire, because it can dry so fast and so much that it will actually tear across the middle when it contracts. Just let it dry gently overnight or for a few hours and you'll soon be able to paint on it.
Now there are two ways to keep watercolours. One is in a pan set, in other words the same liquid paints as are in these tubes but already in little pans or in little boxes and squares, and they're already dried out and just need a little bit of water. Or the way that I use them is to buy the tubes, and I think these larger tubes are far better because you get more value for money. In this case it's a Society of All Artists tube, reasonably priced paints, but what you will notice is on it says artist watercolour, and that is the most important thing, that we do not, in watercolour painting, we do not use cheaper paints. You have to use the artist quality, that's absolutely vital. With any other paint you might get away with it, with acrylics, with oils, but with watercolour it's vital you use only artist quality. Now, once they're squeezed onto a palette and dried out, they're the same as the ones in the pans. So all I have to do to get these working again is simply to put a little bit of water on to soften them, and I'm working away. Here I've got some raw sienna, and I'm going to use mainly for this painting just 4 colours. And that's going to be the raw sienna, burnt sienna, indigo and ultramarine. And I can use those as my base colours for almost the whole of this painting of Beverley Minster. Although I will be using a larger palette and I will be tinting in with other yellows and other warms and cools as well as I go along, but that's my main base palette. For most interiors of churches or so on, that would do me. It's a limited palette and we can get nearly all the colours we want out of that, but I will show you some other colours. So there's my base box of colours. I tend to buy the bigger tubes here. These are 14 millilitres because they go further and it's cheaper buying them that way, but it isn't cheap. But watercolour does last a long time, especially an artist watercolour, an artist quality watercolour. So let's take a look at the other colours I might use. Well, here's a full range of watercolour showing almost every colour I might need, from bright crimson reds through to cadmium oranges, roses, cobalt violets, the various greens and blues, everything there that I will want. But I'll go into those colours as we go along. In more depth it's in my watercolour film, but in this one we're not going to need all of these colours, just a few of them. I can keep all of my various colours in sequence, so if I want cooler yellows or warmer yellows, if I want cooler reds or warmer reds, if I want cooler blues or warmer blues, I've got them there together going around in a colour circle almost. To help you see these colours more clearly and possibly buy them for yourself, here's a chart of the basic colours that I think are necessary. Of course there are far more than this, but if you have this amount you'll find you can do almost anything. Remember, most of these colours are vital. Many colours cannot be mixed, such as the cobalt violet and so on, so you do need to have them ready-made in tubes. Now, what other materials am I going to need? Well, I will be using some drawing gum for this. This is a Pabio one, and it's a blue drawing gum. I prefer the blue drawing gum because I can see where it's gone on the white paper afterwards. This is called masking fluid, basically, and it's a rubber solution which we can place onto the areas of paper where we don't want the paint to go, and we can rub it off later and then repaint those or tint those in. Gives a nice sharp line and great for textures, and we're definitely going to be using it for the highlights in so much of this wooden carving in the Beverley Minster scene. Now, there seems an awful lot of brushes here. You'll also notice sponges. These sea sponges are very good for doing textural work on leaves or beaches. I've got a little tube of white gouache for retouching white areas. If I do go over where I don't want to go and put a bit of white back in again, I could also use a bit of pastel for that. For my basic drawing I have my pencil and rubbers, and you'll see a plethora of brushes here, ranging from toothbrushes here through to oval mops, to round brushes, to fans, to sword brushes, to hake brushes, to flats, and even ones with serrated edges there, look. Now all of these brushes are for different purposes, and unlike oil painting where I might only need 5 or 6 brushes, I use mainly filberts and rounds, and the same for acrylics. For watercolours with so many different effects and textures to get, I find that I need a series of brushes. It's not like a fisherman who has 100 floats but only has 2 favourites. Although I might only use 2 brushes, I could get away with just the oval mop and a rigger, this long thin one here, which is to give a very thin line. Used to be for painting rigging on sailing ships. As Rod Ramsden got away with a hake brush and a rigger as well. You can paint a painting with just a limited amount of brushes. But it's nice to have all of the brushes there for those various effects if you need them, and for different styles of painting. But the one we're going to do, I'm going to mainly need my oval mop and a few small rounds. We won't need many brushes for this job. I may use a few flats for dry brushwork in places as well, but not much. I also have my Profi pens here, the fine line pens for drawing with, of different sizes. And I have in here a piece of stick for using with Indian ink, sharpened at the end, which gives a very nice line as well. And of course I can use brush with Indian ink as well. I have my Chinagraph pencils, very useful. You see they peel back here, you don't have to sharpen them in the field. And they give a waxy dark mark, great for doing snow scenes, dark areas. They will tint with watercolour, and you can paint watercolour over them because they don't move. So a black Chinagraph pencil, very useful. Here I have a clay shaper, which is useful for putting the masking fluid on. I shall be using that because it rubs off very easily off the end. And the toothbrush, which I mentioned earlier here, is very good for splatter work, for flicking watercolour onto a scene such as snow or so on. So there's my selection and why.
Now that the paper's dried and stretched, it's time to start the design and the drawings. So I've had these composite photographs I put together and various photographs I've taken within the Minster over the last few years, and I now need to put those together into one composition. So I can just rest the drawing board on my lap and sit there and gradually work it out bit by bit. Here I'm going to show you how the drawing evolves. This is about 2/3 of the way through now. Careful not to smudge it too much, not to rub the paper surface too much either, otherwise it ruins it for watercolour. I'm using an ordinary B pencil. You can see here I've started from the top centre and I'll work my way out, exploding outwards, into the right, round down to the floor, and then right out and down round to the left and up into the roof. I've gone quite dark in some places as I want that to actually add to the watercolour painting. Perspective is an invention and an illusion to give an illusion of distance, in this case 1 point perspective, but also I've changed the perspective, invented and reused it to give distance up into the ceiling and the vaults as well. The vital horizon or eye level is about the shoulder height of the choir master. From there everything either goes up or down, and it gives the scale as well.
Right, now we've got the drawing done, we want to get the masking fluid on and leave that to dry, and once that's totally dry then we can start the watercolour itself. Now masking fluid is a liquid latex which you put on so that we can peel it off later, leaving white areas. It means we can do very fine light sharp areas, paint over it and then remove the latex afterwards and tint those areas in. Make sure the latex is totally dry, the masking liquid is totally dry before you start putting watercolour on. Also don't leave it in the sunlight because it tends to melt into the paper and it's very difficult to get it off later. Don't have it on too long, in other words. Put it on and then as soon as it's dry, or within that day preferably, start to work on the painting. Right, I'm using this clay shaper tool to put my masking fluid on, and it's just odd spots and dashes here and there that I'm going to need. So these lights, for instance, I want to put masking fluid where they are, just to start off. And you can see it's a slightly greyer, a bluer liquid than the paper, so I can see where it's gone afterwards. All we do is put all of that on to these little light areas that we want, just leaving little highlights and so on. On places like these bits of wood carving, we want little highlights left there, sharply just catching the light all the way along, little dots and dashes, quite loosely in this case, because although I'm going to be painting quite tightly in some areas, I'm going to be quite loose on others. We get the highlights of light across the varnish on the woodwork, the polish in the past. Now I'm going to also use the pencil drawing as a part of the actual painting. As you saw with this painting of Beverley Minster from the outside in springtime one year, I've let the pencil marks show through the watercolour. I've done them a little bit more heavily to make it almost a coloured drawing. And in this case I'm going to be doing a little bit of that as well, rather than have to paint all of my details in. There's quite a lot of this to do in this particular painting. I won't show you it all, I'll just do some of the basics just to show you how it can be done. Because we can't paint in white lines unless we use gouache. We have to leave this white paper showing later for these light areas to show, because we're painting dark onto light. We're not painting light onto dark as we would with an opaque paint. Remember, watercolour is translucent, transparent, and we're working with this beautiful translucency as the main beauty of the... Right, I'm hoping that should be enough. I've coated the surplices and cassocks and so on, and all the little highlights on the varnish and so on here. And I'm hoping the rest I can do by just carefully manipulating the paint. And we're now prepared and ready. My studies are there, my brushes and all the tools I need. The 2 sets of paints are laid out, ready with water, and of course the painting itself is there, ready prepared on an easel. In this case I'm going to work on a vertical. Normally for a landscape I'd work on a flat, but demonstrating the vertical is more useful, and as I'm not doing a lot of wet into wet with this particular painting, then I think that this should be okay. Okay, I'm going to start off this watercolour by doing the organ area here, which I actually deliberately haven't put masking fluid onto, even though it's a very light area. Before I start painting I need to soften my paints up. Now I'm not going to be using the limited palette at this time, but I'm going to put water in my main palette all the way around the top of these paints, which have had a long time to dry out, because the watercolours, quite handily, will go solid after a while, just like the blocks in pan sets, and you'll be scrubbing at them if you don't put a bit of water on first just to soften them. Leave them about 5 or 10 minutes and they'll be ready, and then all you have to do is tickle them with a brush to bring the paint off. And I'm going to want some of these lighter colours first of all for some of the more detailed areas of the organ and so on, and then I'll be down to my limited palette later. Right, looking at my yellows here, I've got a cool yellow here, which is the lemon yellow, and next to it, which looks darker but in fact it isn't, is the aureolin yellow, which I prefer, which is a much lighter and more transparent yellow than the lemon. Then over here we've got raw sienna, we've got chrome, and we've got, or cadmium yellow would be equal to it, and we've got cadmium orange. I'm going to start off with the aureolin yellow and then work into some of the chrome, and then work up to my warmer colours as I go on. We always start with our lightest colours first and work through to our darkest. So that's the area I'm going to work on. Here are the photographs just to show you what it's like. And I've got my photographs next to me as well here to do this. The lighter areas here and slightly darker one there. So I'm going to start off with leaving some whites and using the paint very thinly just to glaze in a light creamy yellow at first down these pipes, leaving areas of white showing as a texture, because we've got shiny light pipes down here. I haven't put masking fluid on, as I say, deliberately. I just want to tint in, and I can paint quite easily down these lines. All the way down here there's little bits of light as well, but we won't overdo that. Nice golden yellow. And we'll get darker colours into that in just a moment. And I've got masking fluid on the bottoms of the pipes here where there's a little bit of white actually gleaming. So I want to go, obviously I need to go across those areas to make sure that that white shows out through the colour later. So down here, gradually building it up so they stay actually fairly light. Just tickling that paint on. Now I'm going to go down to a slightly darker yellow, the chrome yellow. And you can see next to the lemon, the aureolin yellow, the more lemony yellow, how much richer that is. We'll just start to work some of this warmer yellow down here amongst these pipes. You see the difference straight away, and the sides much warmer down between those two pipes. Painting quite carefully, just tip the brush down there, make sure it's nice and tidy. A little bit down here, and up into the golden areas of this. bits of paint amongst the lighter yellow down here as well. We're going to tickle in some darker lines later with a very fine brush, just to get this feeling of these lovely golden pipes. Almost there now. Remember that we can lift out any time we want, so I can take a clean brush and with the same brush wash it off. And if I feel I've got a bit too much paint on, I can just use the wet brush to lift out, get it into a blade, look, pull it between my fingers, make it into a blade, and I can just lift out any little bits of yellow if I don't want them. Now, I'm going to go down one tone, going down now to my raw sienna. You can see how much warmer that is. It's a very golden brown. And again, we'll come back in with that, just dropping it in between the lines of the pipes. It's a bit warmer down here. Especially down this end here. Details I can pick up later. I just want to get the ambience at the moment. Down here, bottom of the pipe. Whether even more orange in fact in a minute. Pipes there. And that inside edge. Well, I've got that colour on my brush at the same time. It's also down here. And then I want that to dry off a bit because I'm going to come back in with a very fine brush and start laying in some warmer colours. Take a little touch of burnt sienna now. Now burnt sienna is the same colour but with a little bit more, it's the same thing basically but it's been burnt. So it makes it a bit more brown, a bit more ready. Just start dropping that in down here as well. There we go. So we'll let that dry off and then we're going to come in with a much finer brush and just tickle up some of the details in there. Right, next I want to work on these redder areas just around here, these decorations down the sides of the organ pipes, and then I'm going to put in some of the darker colours in between. So I'm going to use a finer brush and use a little bit of this cadmium red here. We've got some scarlet there for later. And we just want to carefully work down these red areas down around here. And we've got some nice bits of decoration. This first work I'm doing obviously is very detailed, and as I go on with the painting, in fact I shan't be working into more detail, I'll be working the other way around. I should be gradually going looser with the painting. Bits of decoration right down the pipes, just indicating it. We're not going to be exact, because when you're back from this you can't see this detail. Now I want to come down to these dark areas between the pipes and in between on the woodwork, and I've got a choice. I can use either the ultramarine and the burnt sienna, or I've got my indigo as well for very dark. At the moment I don't want to go too dark. I think I'll use my ultramarine. It's already been dampened, so it's fairly strong. And some of the burnt sienna. And that'll give me quite a nice dark, but a warm dark. And I can go either way into that. It gives me, if you like, a grey. It's a lovely colour for using greys. You can make for skies as well, the warmer or the cooler grey by using more of the blue or more of the brown. I want the paint fairly thick for this, not too thin, because it's not a glaze I'm doing, it's actually dark areas. So now we're going to start on some of these detailed areas. Let's just see how dark it is. We'll put it down here at the bottom. There we go. And I can always come in darker later. I'll just gradually work this up. Now working on the verticals, I've got to be a bit careful, I don't want trickles coming. I'm using a slightly larger brush at the moment just to fill in these larger shadows. We'll just block these areas in straight and gradually work this out. In a moment I'll work down to my smaller brushes. You can see how the pencil marks are also aiding me here because they're helping to give me the darks as well, where the paint shows transparently through. I should come a bit darker into that afterwards. Just build up these mid-tones first. Right, now I need to come down to a slightly smaller brush. Before I do that, I'm just going to take a little bit of pure ultramarine, just a little bit of thin ultramarine, and some of these areas need to be a bit bluer up here. Some blue tint that comes across quite a lot of this woodwork. You have to really look for these colours, remember, all the time. Painting, you've really got to make sure that you're not just plonking things on without looking and thinking. Now to the smaller brush. I'm going to make it a little bit darker now. I'm going to add a touch of the indigo to it. So a touch of indigo in with the burnt sienna as well, to go that bit darker. That will give us just that bit more depth into here. And we really start to look now at slightly finer details on this organ. In between here, between the triangles. Little filigree work that's all into here. I do want this sort of detail at the moment. So we're starting to get that shiny effect now of the gold paint and gold leafing on the organ pipes. And just back into there a touch with a little bit of the yellow from earlier. The top here with these golds. That's the organ pipes done for the moment. Now we'll work our way down to the filigree work around here. I'm going to work my way down here now, and the first thing I want to do is to get the lightest undercoats in. There's this yellow shining through from the artificial light across the and through these bits of wood carving and filigree here. There's some lighter colours coming down here, and then we're going to work up the warmer browns and then into the blues and then through to the darks again. So my next are going to be a series of washes, just laid one into another, wet next to wet, blending in through here, let those dry, and then we'll work the details over the top. So starting with my number 8 again, I'm going to come in with the yellow first of all. In this case I'm going to be using the chrome yellow, quite thinly, just to give a wash through here. Right through all of that, no worry. I'll come over with the blue in a minute. Right through all of that, no worry. Thin it down just a fraction. And that comes right the way through there. And across the top here. We've got masking fluid across the top there to show the lights out as well. And the yellow is also going to come down each side here. And that's about where it does. The blue is coming across the rest and across here as well. And then I'm going back to my ultramarine again. Thin wash all the way across the rest, linking it in, letting that one colour blend into another slightly hard at the edges there. Ultramarine, very thinly, as a wash, right through the whole of this, right down through to the choir here, letting it just softly blend in a bit, all the way down there. Doesn't matter if I come across that bit because I've got masking fluid there anyway. Leave a little bit of paper sparkling here and there. Screw through, we can put it across some of the yellow now here. Right through. It's just through there, little bits of light just showing through. Actually, things are coming together fairly rapidly even now. Now, while it's still wet, I want to drop in more colour there, so I'm going to mix my ultramarine and burnt sienna again. And just start to warm things up a bit here now. Drop into there, into those areas, these darks, just let them spread out a bit. We'll let the wet into wet do the work. Now when we paint wet onto dry we get a hard edge. When we paint wet onto wet we get a softer edge. When we paint wet next to wet we get a softer edge. At the moment we're painting wet onto wet, so we're getting them spreading out a bit. And that's what we want. I don't want things too sharp and too hard edged back there. We want this soft, dark shadowed light
this feeling that there's a lot going on. Gradually building up these darks as I go on. So you see I'm getting darker and darker as I progress through this painting. Building up from my lights, as you have to do with watercolour, to my darks. That's my indigo now and burnt sienna. Isn't it very dark? We can build up layer by layer, actually getting darker and darker. I can even do a little bit of dry brush work here, just dragging the brush across, get the feeling of light gleaming through and shining across these. Now let's go quite a lot darker again. I want to drop in a graduated wash here where it goes from dark to slightly lighter, and behind this bit where it got lovely. Let that link around that arch, come down into there. And by playing between these warms and cools, we can get some beautiful effects. Still gradually working it up darker and darker until we get the feeling of detail that we want. I could go in and put every little filigree in, but we don't want to be doing that. I'm just feeling my way around this. I'll come back in now. When that's dry, do a little more there. So that completes that area for the moment as I want it. Now before I come onto these sides, I actually want to come down and paint the whole of this floor. And now I'm moving on to the floor. I'm going to start going back to my more traditional palette here of the raw sienna, the yellow. I shan't be using a lot of lemon yellow or chromes for this now. Going to the softer colours, and that yellow I'll use throughout most of the picture. So I'm going to put a thin wash of that over the whole of this and then build up after it dries with these geometric shapes. For that I'm going to use an oval mop. It's a lovely brush because I want to get a large area of wash straight into it. So plenty of water here, touch my raw sienna. Raw sienna nicer than yellow ochre because it's more transparent. I want it fairly thin. So a nice thin wash of that all the way across here. Moment, right down through from there all the way. Doesn't matter if it comes over the, so let it just drag off down here. So we've got some white showing at the edge. Not worried if it comes across the chair at all because I'm going to want some of it in there later anyway. Won't do any harm. Dry brushwork with the light shining around there, no harm. And it comes through up to here, down here as well. I'll get that in while I'm at it. Wash all the way through here, nice and thinly across here first. And while we're at it, that yellow's going to be coming into here as well. Whatever it's going to be, we'll do it. Doesn't matter if it comes all behind here, the whole thing can have a wash of it. Already we're getting the atmosphere of the place. You see, I deliberately haven't gone right to the edges. I've left, as you said, I would say, a vignette around them. Where I want a little bit stronger in colour, I can drop that in while it's still wet now. Through here and so on. Some of these areas are thinner than others. In other words, they're a thinner coat of the wash, so they'll be lighter. We paint it lighter by using it thinner.
against the white of the paper with watercolour, not white paint. I'm going to stand up now and work standing up because I need to do these lovely big strokes into here to try and get these colours right, wet into wet now. I've taken my raw sienna and I want burnt sienna in there. We're going to start making it a lot warmer in places. Down here, for instance, this archway. You see, I'm letting that wet into wet do the work. It's going to spread a bit. It's going to be controlled accident down here. Put some more of the raw sienna in, make it a bit more gold in places. Dry brushwork happening too. So this is raw sienna and burnt sienna at the moment. Just working up my warms and cools. And I do want lovely soft wet into wet effects for the stone. We're covering paper fairly quickly here now, as you can see. Now I'm going to take my ultramarine back in with that. Start to drop that in. Nice big mop for this, 1/2 inch oval mop, Pro Art mop. Gradually building up these layers of warms and cools, subtle changes between the blues, the brown. Trying to keep the whole painting flowing at once, so that any one part isn't finished before another, and letting gravity mix the paint. What wonderful effects we can get this way. Across things, don't just go with them, go across them a bit as well. Just really work up this brushwork and texturing. And those reflective colours come into this as well. And then again back to my ultramarine mix, ultramarine and burnt sienna. Start bringing these cools back in there again. You can use an oval mop edge on as well, you see, which saves you changing backwards and forwards between thick and thin brushes as well. It's quite handy. I'm going to go a lot darker yet, but just bit by bit. Find the cools up in the arches of this. Really get these cools and warms working for us back there. In a moment I'm going to go much stronger still and start dropping in the indigo. So we really do get some lovely rich darks happening down through here.
At the moment we're just building it up, wet into wet. And again, we'll go in again, still with the ultramarine and the sienna, darker still, really start building up into here. And let it come out with the wet, into the wet. And we want it a bit darker behind the organ still to bring the organ out a bit. So that's what we'll do. Just indicating shapes up here. Now, I said I was going to go darker, yet I'm going to start using the indigo to really get some darks into this bit. Really push these blacks. Well, you see, we're not using black. I mean, I don't use black in watercolour or in my oils or anything else. I'm an impressionist, so I like to work with colour. I very, very seldom use black. It's always a mixture of very deep blues or browns and warms. But hardly ever black. Now we're really hopefully starting to get this feeling of the depth of this. We should paint these darks with these little tips across later as well. Same across here, we need to work up our real darks. Not that I haven't started already, but let's do a bit more dry brushwork over here. We'll use this lovely rough paper we've got now, try and get some more of that texture going. And so it's amazing what we can do with just a few colours. I don't want to lose this lovely feel of watercolour, so I am working quite loosely and letting this wet into wet spread to give myself atmosphere and gradually build it up. And we get the illusion and the atmosphere and the light of the place. Leave that as it is for the moment and come back down to the floor again. Now with the floor I've got to come back to my smaller number 8 brush. I'm only using 3 brushes so far, 1/2 inch oval mop, a number 8, a number 2, and I've already given it a coat of raw sienna. Now I want to go a little bit stronger with that wash because the light is flooding across here from light to dark from that side, so I'm going to go a little bit stronger with the wash of the raw sienna. Just down here, that's too strong. So take it and thin it out. And then take clean water and blend it across and in. Let it come right down from inside there. Through here, I'll try and brush a bit. We'll let that dry again. That's just dry enough now to we'll take the number 8 round and start to work up the next lightest tones, which are within these angles here, and it's that mixture of raw sienna and burnt sienna, which gives us a slightly warmer tint. Just try a bit of that. Like that. Not a lot warm, but just a bit, and that's on every one of those. In fact, as it's going to be darker over the other ones, I can afford to do those zigzags completely, so I'll just go straight round them like that in one go to save myself time. And it's a bit like using a round brush for a square hole. You know, I'm using the right size brush here for the right size hole, hopefully. Let's see, now that's that. That's that and that's that. Yes, we've got to just make sure that I'm doing the right marks in the right places. It's very easy to get lost on something like this. Be a bit looser as I come down here. I'm not going to paint right to the edges here. And all the way around here. Almost up to the background. Just indicate when we get back this far, because it'll be disappearing anyway. Those colours are going to come underneath there a bit. Right, we better let that dry a bit. This morning I'm going to go back to those tiles again, and I'm going to use a flat square-ended brush, the same width as the tile bands I'm painting, to paint in the dark alternate ones. So as I was saying, round brush, round object, square brush, square object. I used a round brush to go like a snake along the lines, now I want a flat brush to finish off. I already have my colour ready made here. Because most of my painting now has been done with these few colours. Remember, we've got indigo, ultramarine, raw sienna and burnt sienna, and the indigo and the burnt sienna, or the ultramarine and the burnt sienna, will give me that dark I need for these areas. So we'll just wet the dark watercolour that I made from yesterday, already done, and we'll see if we can do some of these alternate darks on here. All I should have to do is just go across in one band like that on each one. Might not quite be wide enough, this brush, but you can see why I've gone for a flat-ended brush now, because I want to straight end, and these things are in perspective as well, so I've got to use the brush at a slight angle, straight across here. An angle when it comes from there, so it takes a little bit more care in painting. We may have to give these a second coat yet as well, because we want them quite dark in places. I'm going to use a bit of dry brushwork at the edge here, where I don't really want to be too strong with the colour. I just want it to come off the edge more. So I'm using the brush with a little less paint on and just dragging it across the surface here, rather than being too neat and tidy with it. I'm going to do the same on these a little bit, just a little bit of dry brushwork so that it comes off the And actually, it happens the other way around a bit as well. There's a little bit of dry brush that comes across. The other one's a bit textural. Just drag the brush across those as well. Just getting that tickle of paint on, just to indicate some of them are more dark than others, so we need a bit more
paint into some of it. And back here, just indicating a bit of dry brush work just to bring that out. And then on top they go quite a bit bluer. I've got a second panel to think about here, where it's going to be a little bit bluer. Maybe even a touch of colour in it. Maybe even a touch of cobalt violet in it actually. I'm going to add a little bit of that and see what happens. To have the colours changing slightly. There's a little bit of cobalt violet going on in those. So we will just change our colours a little bit more subtly here. So ultramarine blue, a little touch of the dark that we already had on the brush, and cobalt violet. Not painting it on too heavily, just dragging it over the surface. I'm going to add more colour into this in a minute. You see, I'm not trying to be exact. If I was, this looseness just wouldn't work here in the foreground especially. I need to just push the blues a little more in places. Just a bit of wet into wet on there. There is reflections happening down through here as well, so I can afford to let the brush come vertically through it in places. To try and get these effects. By the use of glazes and sort of marbling texturing going on the edges of some of these to give the effect of more three-dimension. We won't do that, just pick it out in some areas. Now I think I just need to warm up the edges of a few of these a little more, not much because they've already been done. Just take a little yellow, a little raw sienna and burnt sienna, just a tad more of it. A tad's a lovely word, isn't it? And we'll just glaze into there a little more in places. I've already put some on to lighten those areas up, but I think it just needs a little more. And we'll just drag it across one or two of the other spots as well, on these foreground ones. Not to overdo it, be careful we don't overdo things. But go back to my larger brush, the oval mop. We'll do the same with that. We'll just mix a bit of this sienna and raw sienna and burnt sienna. Thin it down a bit. I just want to get a bit more dry brush work going on. Places on this. Right, now it's time to work up to the walls and down here in the seats. I think I want to work on the seats first. Now, working down here, we've got light areas on here, which I've got to leave slightly lighter. So I'm going to take some clean water on my brush and straight away just put that around those areas so that when I put paint nearby, they should soften anyway. And I'm going to make up my ultramarine, as last time, and a little touch of the sienna into it. Fairly blue, burnt sienna, fairly blue at the moment, and work down to these lights right around the edges here, just leaving it glowing around the edge. And a little bit stronger right down to them. Nice and rapidly. You don't want to get in your way too much. Just bring that perspective in from here a bit, just crossing to the edge there. Right round the lights here, down to there. That comes all the way down to here. There's a red line along there in a moment, but we'll deal with that in due course. These marks right off here. Let the eye come in, leave the eye in there a bit. Now I've got to go darker still, so I'm going to take some of the deeper blues now and start to work in these spikes that are coming in here quite strongly. All the way down to there. A little bit more brown to it, make it a bit warmer. So start to get some darker areas. And these textures are going to be indicated all the way up here. These effects down here. So the indigo and the Mount Sienna to give me these lovely darks. Flick them in. In some cases they're much warmer as they come up closer to us here, certainly. Now, there's a nice dark line along there. We have to be able and prepared to move in between these warms and cools whenever we need. I want to be a bit warmer here. Which will bring the thing forward to us a bit more. And then it goes bluer down here. Try brushwork again, don't be afraid. And that comes down through there and gets quite a little bit warmer in places there. All the way down through here. And then much darker down here. And into there. The indigo and the sienna again. And the subtle move between the warm cools of this. really fine, these darks just here. So a clean brush, or a wet but cleaner brush, just work into here like that. Just indicate the feeling of something going on here. The same way as we can with these bits of hue going back there, and the darker bits along here as well. Which hopefully will come out more when I remove the masking fluid in the not distant future. Now we have to move across to the other side. Do the same here. We'll work through with the ultramarine first. The blues that are going on around those lights. First of all, I need to put a bit of water around those lights so that we get that softer edge again. Then the ultramarine should be happening around the outside of them. Right up and through here to here. Oh, I'm at it. So the slightly redder colour needs to come into here a bit more too, the other side. Very dark, fairly strongly painted again. We want fairly thick pigment to do these darks in at first here when we first start doing these spikes, because they want to show up against the background. And the choristers. It's a lovely way to work looses like this, bringing the cools into the warm. So I'm really piling in the paint here. No good being afraid of it, got to get in there and get it right. Lead in, lead the eye in there. As things dry out we can go back in and make things a little darker here and there where we need. Drop in colour. Where necessary.
So we'll have to leave that at that for the moment while it dries just a bit more before I can put any further colours into that. Right, what I feel I need to do now is just go back in with a few darks in the foreground, because remember, when we put one glaze over another, everything becomes one tone darker. So if I go back into this now, and things are now dry, or drier, so I can actually start to paint in some darker shapes into here, which should show over the top of things a bit more, possibly lead the eye in. Same across the other side. We just need to get the shapes a little bit clearer there. Working up these few details just to give the feeling of a bit more detail here and there. Leads the eye into this picture. And the next stage will be to start putting in some of the brighter colours and removing the masking fluid, because we're at the stage now where we can actually remove that masking fluid. Before I do the masking fluid, I'm just going to take a bit of scarlet and put in some of the red on the edges of the pews here. I might take it down a bit yet because it's going to be a bit too bright like it is, but just to start things off, some of this will be a bit lighter, and the masking fluid has to come off some of these areas too yet, so it'll need painting in afterwards. Okay, the paint should be dry enough now to allow me to start to remove the masking fluid. I prefer to use a cloth for this one than my finger. You see how easily this comes away. All of this white should come back up, and this is why we use the masking fluid, is so that we got lovely sharp white clean edges. And it's also very important that we don't rub any wet paint, because that will smear over it, so we must make sure it's dry when we do this. It takes a bit of removing. It's been on a couple of days now, so it becomes harder as the time goes on to remove it. You don't want to leave it on too long, especially, as I said, don't leave it near sunlight, because that will melt it into the paper. And we'll need to tint most of these back because they're going to be too bright at the moment. Right, now we've got rid of the masking fluid, continue with the putting in the crimsons, the reds here, which need working up a bit. I might need to make them a little bit cooler in places as well. And I'll use the mop just gently, so a little bit of, get it clean again, just a little bit of the raw sienna, because some of these lights need taking down a bit. Now the cobalt violet that I was using a bit earlier, I just want to come in and tint that over in some of these places, just a bit in here, just to give that feeling of light, luminosity, and link it a bit with the violet that I'd done before. So these areas here that are now a little bit too light, you can just bring a bit of that violet back, put it round to my number 8 round, and we'll look at these lights that we've already left slightly soft at the edges. What I'm going to do now is just lift away a bit more of that, just make it a little softer at those edges around that light by using some clean water and just rubbing it gently with the brush, just rubbing away some of that light around it to give the feeling of a halo of light. This paper is very absorbent actually, so it doesn't rub out very easily. And then we'll go back with this fine brush, with a smaller brush. We'll go back with a smaller brush to take a little bit of the chrome, a nice clean place for that. Not much of it, just a wee touch, just to go around these lights a bit and just bring them out a little bit be the same the other side as well. We'll have a little bit of yellow around, and some of that yellow will be reflecting in here too. Not a lot, but just a bit. Take the number 8 again, take some of that same chrome, and we'll just tint in a little bit all around these to get the reflections of the yellows here. A little bit more down here, just to get that bit of extra warmth coming up amongst these colours, to play against the browns of the others. You see, we don't have to make one colour keep adding. We don't have to keep adding to one colour to make it stronger. We can do it by adding to an opposite colour. So if I want something cooler, I can make something warmer. If I want something brighter, I can make something darker next to it, and so on. Well, it's time that we started on the choristers, the final section of this before we actually tidy up loose ends. And I want to look at these faces. We've got a bit of cobalt violet coming into them, and a little touch of yellow as well. I don't think we're going to make them very orange or anything like that. Just let the light reflect across them. Maybe a wee touch of rose coming in, but I think with the rest of the colours of the surplus and cassocks we'll have enough in there. So let's just put a little bit of that in first. Small brush. And we'll just take a little touch of the cobalt violet and look at these faces first with that. And then, as I was saying, a little touch of yellow. Not much, but just a bit on the side of the faces. And you see, we've almost got enough there now. What needs is the hair on top of that later. A little bit of yellow again onto them, not too much, but a bit strong there. Just take some of that out a bit. Maybe a wee touch of the rose coming in. A little bit of red coming in there. Not a lot, just a wee touch. Okay, let's make a start on these choristers. Hopefully, keeping it to a minimum, we can paint in just a few marks here and there that will denote all the colours we require. A bit of red around the collars should do the work. Doesn't want to be too bright a red, so I'm going to use the cadmium and a little bit of rose. And for the hair, do an awful lot again. We can just put a little bit of dark in. We're not going to be painting portraits, so we're not going to do it in that much detail. Just make it a bit darker in place. It's just a go on to say into too much detail, just enough. And then for the surpluses, I'm going to go back to my cobalt violet and some of the blues. I'll just tint in some of the greys. Able to get some off there, look. There we go. A nice blue colour in here, which is so important to me because that's what I wanted to pick up on. And this turquoise blue is one that I bought especially for this beautiful colour that it has in it. I'm going to come back onto this with a richer red. I'm going to use that burnt sienna in fact into here to deaden this down a bit because it's just a little bit too bright as it is. So let's bring that brown into here, burnt sienna, to link it with the rest of the painting. And I'll bring a bit more red in a moment. That'll do for now, let that dry off a bit.
I feel there are just a few things to finish off this painting. I'm going to work a little more chrome yellow and a little bit of the raw sienna around the lights, both into the background and just surrounding the lights. And I'm also going to add a little bit more red to the edges of the arms of the choristers and a little bit of ultramarine blue to the surplices, just to bring the blues out a bit. Well, we're back from Scotland now, and we've done, or attempted to do, a couple of on-plein air works, even with the bad weather. What I'd like to do now, quite separately from that film, is a studio piece, one of the favourite shots that I took there. Beautiful photograph over that research lock up in Abundant. And I'm going to do this in both acrylics and oils. Start off with acrylics just to build the basic up, and try and be a little bit more figurative, a little bit more realistic with this particular piece. A composite where I'm going to use the photograph and, again, to be a little bit more commercial, perhaps bring a few grouse coming through to give that real feeling of Scotland and the wildlife that's there. So let's enjoy doing that in close-ups to see the brushwork as well and look at the techniques of doing a slightly more photographic piece of representational work. Well, I've set out my oil paints here and a few acrylics just to make a start on the sky and reflections. I'm only going to need white, yellow ochre, black, a little touch of ultramarine and some burnt sienna for this. And then I've got my fairly full palette of oils, although I shan't need all of those colours. The board that I'm painting on is a board that I had up in Scotland with me, and I found that the acrylics were resisting it, so it'll be interesting today to see how that acrylic takes to it a bit thicker. But it'll be alright for the oils, I'm sure. Of course, we're going to do this picture and then add the birds at the end. So I want to do these subtle greys first, which are a touch bluer than I have here. First thing to do is a nice big brush to a filbert. And when we're mixing a light colour, remember to mix the lighter colour first. In other words, we mix the white and then the colour into it. If you don't do it that way around, you end up with a gallon of paint, and you don't want too much. I'm going to work from my darker greys up towards my lighter greys. So in this case I'm going to add a little bit of blue. So do it this way around, you end up with far too much paint. Nice subtle darker bluey greys, so a little bit of blue. Blue and brown gives you a grey anyway. A little bit of the brown. So I may not need much black at all. There we are, we're getting the colours we want. A little bit more blue. Nice intermediate grey, and try that out. I haven't drawn out the composition at all. I'm going to work fairly intuitively onto this. I know that the horizon line starts slightly below halfway and comes up to about just a bit above here. So what I want to do is just mark it in. I've got this nice light blue-grey base that I want to put into here. We've got some wonderful effects to have to do into this later, but at the moment I just want to get rid of the black because I want to work my oils over this. And the black will be fine for glowing through the darker background later on. So painting it fairly thickly, as you can see, because I want to cover up this black, and in this case these paints are covering it quite well. The other acrylics I was using earlier were resisting this terribly, and I just gave up. I just went straight onto a different canvas. So I'm mixing up my slightly darker greys with the various warms and cools, because it's some lovely colours going on into here. You see, by the use of more brown or more blue, I can make a more blue or brown grey. Don't use black and white normally, it makes things very sooty. Black is a very sooty colour to mix. The Impressionists banned it altogether from their palettes. So we'll go a bit darker still. The lovely subtle greys we can get this way. And so I want to work up my deeper greys first. It'll dry pretty quickly on this board, so I'll be able to work coats over it. You can see how I'm using the brush at a very slight tilt, not straight on and not flat on, but just about 3/4 here, in different directions to brush this colour so where it's warmer. It's a bit warmer up here. Look at these variations of blue-browns, greys. Before I bring the lighter colours over the top in a minute, just little strokes, quite big strokes actually with this brush. It's a 3/4 inch filbert, a nice nylon filbert. We can get these lovely variations of warm and cool grey this way. Just letting one come over the other. Now the tip of the brush a bit more, and I'm just blending it in and across the other colours.
And if we're really successful with it, we don't even need the oil on it. We'll just say, well, that's made it and that's it. So I've got quite a warm grey there at the moment. Now a little touch more blue into there, make it a slightly bluer grey. You can see the warm grey that we had earlier. Now I want to come in a bit bluer with it. To here, this nice chunky, yet still subtle and soft clouds. So are moulded up into the sky. Actually build them up. The thing with acrylic is, as it dries so quickly, is you can't blend afterwards. It's very difficult. So I like to try and get it done while it's still fairly wet. So I can bring those colours down below. I'm not using much water at all because I want the paint to cover this dark prime board I've already done in acrylic. Work our way across now and add a little more, a slightly warmer but lighter grey, and work into it. We may work over it several times building up these colours. So I want to get a really subtle effect of the clouds. I'm going to be fairly photographic this time. And work our way right the way across the painting. And as we've got a coat of paint on, I can add more water now to my paint and start to use a few more glazes. I can use the paint more thinly, in other words, to paint it transparently across the surface more. Mixing up some more ultramarine and burnt sienna, just a little. It gives me an in-between grey, not a cool or a warm, it's the use of both. And if I want to go cooler or warmer, then all I have to do is add more of the blue. I'm not using black at all. I thought I may need to, but I'm just going to use this variations of the greys, and I'm going to then come on with a little bit of yellow ochre and white to start bringing up the whites, the lights of the clouds. You see how I change my brush stroke as I come around, feeling underneath the clouds as well. And it's like different opposites. If we play rough against smooth, warm against cool, light against dark, then the opposite of each of those will be enhanced. So if I put the opposites in the colour circle together in just the same way they would be, and a bit more water in that, and I can start to just glaze it a bit. And more water still. You can feel these clouds coming over the surface of the paint and just feather them in, feathering being this tickling motion of the brush. Use more water to blend it, and one glaze after another, just gradually building it up. We can do this with oils, and in some way with oils it's easier because they stay soft, but we don't glaze as easily with oils. In this case we're glazing. The oils would be putting the surface, mixing the paint one into another, rather than just glazing over the surface because it takes ages for it to dry. Now it's time to start looking at the lighter colours that I want to put. So I'm going to start mixing some yellow ochre and white. These are previous greys, just using the blue and the brown. Now a little touch of yellow ochre, it doesn't take much. We don't need lemon yellow, yellow ochre is plenty yellow enough. I don't want it too light either. Gradually build up the lights. And you see how strong that is compared to the other grey. I want to start to find these lighter colours in the sky. I'm going to need to blend these a bit, so I don't want it to be too... With this oil I'd be just subtly bringing this in now, but it's not, it's acrylic, so it's going to be a slightly sharper edge. I may even use the oils over the top yet to come back into it. I just want to find these lighter bits of warm cloud, which again will play against, let's use it with plenty of water, which will play against the cools and warms of the greys. Just subtly blending the colours in, feeling the light coming through these clouds. Keep your brush going in different directions, feeling the light, feeling the shapes of the light as it comes through. give us a beautiful transparency to this Highland cloud that's always such a nuisance actually at the time. It was so wet we just couldn't get going. And gradually let our lights come out. So we're starting with the darker parts of the cloud and gradually finishing up with these lighter bits. Just tickle. That's why it's important to have a brush that's good for the purpose. This one is too stiff for watercolour, but it is very nice for acrylics or oils. You can try and feel the flow of those clouds coming around there, swirling a bit, and then we can go a bit cooler in places as well. And then I want to come back finally with an ever such light mix of the yellow ochre and white, just to get these last fluffy bits of light cloud shining in here. Having got that, we need to move down to the water. We're going to use the same sorts of colours, because obviously the colours are reflecting in the water. So let's mix up our mid-greys again and get this basically coloured for the moment, just to, you see how that's trying to resist me then. And one of the tricks with water is to paint the verticals first, to paint the depth of the water first, to paint the reflections into that depth and feel the darks within the depth, and then bring the surface ripples, lights and sheens across the top at the end. Now, you can't do that as easily with watercolour, because watercolour demands that we leave the lights first. But with this way of painting we can. I'm going to paint very light details over the top with a finer brush later as well. So I'm mixing up some quite strong colours here now, quite strong greys, just to give me the base coat. And to bring the other light colours through in more detail as we go on. And a bit more warmth to the sky as well by putting a very thin glaze of yellow ochre and sienna over it. And of course back down to our greys here, which we were originally mixing, so that all our brush strokes are horizontal. Start to feel the depth of the water, as I was saying, and let those reflections shine through, as compared to the sky, which have quite different marks, more fluffy and cloud-like. And as the water's a slight ripple on it, we want to get that effect of the ripple, and we'll work over this over and over again, across and downwards. You can see how I'm using the brush vertically, the tip of the brush now, not the flat, the tip of it far more, vertically more than horizontally and flatly, and the warmth of these silver greys against the warmer greys. Just starting to play with the ripples in the water now, just flicking with the tip of my brush, just flicking across the top. This is one of the beauties of the filbert brushes, is that we've got a flat and a narrow edge to it. A little bit more water means that on my brush means that I can start to do these little ripples coming through. I could do this with a finer brush, but I don't really need to. I can use this brush to give the effect of these ripples down here, and I shall come back again with a darker colour in a moment. That's the beauty of acrylics, is that we can play with these glazes. You can see how I work across the canvas and then down into it as well, like that. Or the board, I should say, in this case. Let's go back to our darker greys, mix up some darker ones again, because actually it's quite dark in places. Darker than I'm getting now, in fact, still. Let's play between the horizontal and the vertical in the reflections. Gently dragging dry brush across the surface there to get a little bit of blending of the dark and warm over the surface of the water, not too much. I'm going to have some grasses across that yet, so the leaves through there, so it won't matter too much there. But there's a darker area up here, which is quite important, of horizontal. Use the edge of the brush now to drag round down through there a bit more. Gradually building up these darks still. Almost enough. This is our basic ground for the painting. We've got the details to add in afterwards, which I'll probably do more with the oils. So I've got my ground there. Now I want to look at the darker areas of the mountains and hills here, starting with a very pale purple almost. I don't want to be using too much of my acrylics on this because I do want to come back to the oils more for these more subtle colours. I'll just mark up where things are going. Just starting to paint some of the highlights into bushes and trees here. Having done my duller colours, I'm now starting to bring in little tickles of these greens to catch the sunlight over the tops of the trees here. Very finely. I've got to bring the dark branches over the front later on. Sunshine across the tips of the trees. What we're attempting to do now is start to bring out these much lighter background. I'm using a little bit of lemon yellow now, just the beginning of it. Just to start to feel some of this, a little bit of white into that as well, just to get a bit more body to go into the background. And we'll start to try and find these layers of light coloured trees picking up the sunlight behind here. Now it's quite golden, so I'm going to take some chrome yellow and see what that does. And these colours should help to push back cools in the background. I think you can see what I mean. Even down into a bit of pure cobalt blue here now to try and get the feeling of the cool against the coming up into the hill itself, of course. Of course. Now we'll start using this light green to look at the surface of the water. So we've got most of our sunlight going on here now. Starting to build up the much stronger, warmer colours into the foreground. So to cool that down just a bit, I'll put a bit of cerulean blue back into that with some white and just cool that right back so we get the warmth amongst these cool leaves, otherwise I'll be standing up too much and I must be three-dimensional into the air. That sort of colour, you see it's not just one colour all the time that makes the thing work, it can be one colour against another very often. If anything, we need a little bit of warm against that as well, so we're going to need a bit of chrome yellow, just a touch of white amongst these, just one or two yellowy bits to make the green seem greener and catch that sunlight. Now we need to start looking at these darks and branches. The dark we want for the foreground is going to be Prussian blue and a bit of umber again, probably raw umber because it's cooler. And with this, to get the right consistency, we've got to have just the right consistency of paint, in other words, just enough terps to help it to flow. I'm going to start with a larger brush. Let's see, that's halfway there, it's a quarter of the way there, halfway, quarter, just inside here. And that comes down and all the way to just below the half, which is about here. Just mark it out first, up to here, and then it's going to come all the way through and round and down and into there like that. So it's fairly warm, it's fairly thick, that sort of thickness, and we've got to go from thin, I mean to thick. We can't go thick, thin, we've got to keep it gradually growing through here. Now we want something a bit warmer. I may even have to come down to a purple, but I'm going to use some burnt sienna now. Come warm through there. Push that cool back. A bit of ultramarine now. As it comes down cool through this bit. You may have to wait till the paint dries a bit to really get this right, but There we go. Take a bit of purple. Work that purple in there. That'll give me the dark I want. And the luminosity. We should go down to a smaller brush later, but just for the moment, now look at it. And just enough terps on your brush, not too much, make it too thin, but enough to let it flow. I'm still using a filbert to make these main branches. Like talking of smaller brushes, let's try a little round. It's only a cheapie I bought the other day, but let's see if it works. Sometimes usually these cheapies are horrible, but this one actually doesn't look too bad. Give it a go, shall we? Again, it's getting the paint mix right. Looks to be okay, let's find out. That's not too bad. We can do our little twigs and things with that. As I say, this painting is going to be full of detail, which is not something I don't normally do, but if I'm going to show you how, I might as well do it properly. Explain everything while I'm going on. I'm going to grow the leaves on the twigs afterwards. Grow my twigs first and then grow the leaves later. I've got to go ever so thin. I may even have to use a rigger or one little single point brush or something, because these twigs are very, very thin coming down here. And I'm making the point of the brush into a blade each time I put paint on. It's not just the point of the brush, I'm flattening it out against, as you see here, there's the blade, against the palette each time to give myself a much thinner edge. A little trick for getting fine brushwork. For those of you that said I can't paint photographically, well, if I want to I can, but again it's the same as you, it's your choice, you do what you want to do. I don't normally, because I like to be more alive and loose, but it's fun occasionally to have a little challenge like this. Well, that's one thing about a cheap brush, the end just fell off into the terps. Having got my brush back again, go back to the details on this, and it's time to actually start putting some of these little leaves in, and I'm going to again do the mid-tones and darks first, almost painting leaf by leaf. Here's a little mountain ash first of all. Let the brush make the pattern. It's got to build up bit by bit by bit by bit by bit. You start to get the effect now as I'm doing this, you start to see how it's working. But it's going to take a lot of texturing. I might use a sponge in a minute to get all this lot done here. There's far too much to do just with a brush really. Right, take a break and we'll find the right sponge. Okay, our next job is to mix enough paint just to use with the sponge. I've got a piece of sponge here that should do the job for doing this textural work here. Don't use a fine brush for it. I'm going to use some burnt sienna, I'm going to use some raw umber, some ultramarine and some Prussian, a little bit of purple just to give a really dark colour, maybe even a little touch of the Viridian just to get a bit more green into it. There we go, let's try that. Squeeze the brush out, leave it there. Now with a bit of luck, if I just use my sponge to dabble in the edge there, I should be able to get a nice texture, you see. Now the thing with sponging or anything like this is not to press too hard and also not to overdo it. You see we can get a very nice effect for the leaves, but maybe a little bit small actually on this one. I may have to go to a slightly larger sponge. I'm going to use the sponge on the slightly smaller leaves here. may want to put some large ones on later, but I'll just get... Now always twist the sponge, otherwise you'll get a pattern rather than a picture about leaves. It looks as if you spent hours and hours doing it, but you can see from what I'm doing it's not. It's very techniquey, a bit slick, but if it does the job and we do it properly, it should still look quite professional. I'm going to get some larger sponge in a minute and do some larger leaves. And you can always drag the sponge slightly too if you want. So now I'm going to need some larger leaves, so I'm going to want some slightly heavy, more textural sponge, I'm feeling. I can find it amongst my bits of sponges. But already we're well into this tree. Now what I'm going to do now is mix up a whole lot more. Some of this I may come in and do with a brush as well. We can even start to use it onto the bits of heather down here by just pulling it a bit and twisting it round to get the effects of leaves. Again, it makes it look as if we've done lots and lots and lots of work. Actually, it's very simple. And we can do this with the lighter colours when it's dry as well. There we are, so we'll let that dry off next. Well, as you can see now that the textural paint we've done is dried fairly well overnight. Being on board, it soaks it in. This is MDF, heavy MDF. And we were doing the sponge work here for the leaves using these two sponges, so we've got different textures slightly here, finer and slightly thicker. And now we want to build up these lighter areas of the leaves and textures, which I'll show you by just zooming in on the part so you can see how it's done. We're going to be mixing some lighter greens, so we need these mid-greens first of all and then the very light ones. So there are two different light colours here we can do. And to do that I'm going to be using these three here, the emerald, the yellow green, and we'll possibly be using a bit of light blue later on as well on the surface. So again, start with one of your larger brushes to mix, so you want plenty of it. And we're at a fairly mid-green in this case, so we'll take some viridian and some emerald. And a little touch of yellow ochre just to take it back a little bit, make it warm. And that should do it. Maybe a wee touch of lemon yellow just to give it a bit more yellowness. There we are, that's a nice colour. Now if I take that with my fine sponge, you can see how it's at the end now, the texture's there for the leaves. See here how the texture went on before. We did the fine work, remember the twigs with the little round brush. Then we use the sponge to do the darker areas. Now we just want to start putting on these bits of sunlight that are catching on the surface, look, like this. This is our mid-green tone, going over the darker green. We'll get some highlights of the much lighter green as well. Twist the sponge around so that it doesn't make a pattern, so that you're actually getting the effect of the leaves. And you can see when we go over a dark area here, how nicely it shows how these leaves textures pick up, coming out onto the actual sunlight here, all the way down. So that's how we're going to build up now the lighter areas of leaves. Now we need some much larger leaves, so I'm using a bit heavier sponge, a bit darker and warmer here in the foreground, so little leaves in the background there, but we need some larger ones to come forward here. And as I say, if we put warm against cool, light against dark, rough against smooth, it will enhance each of those as we go along. I'm going to have to come back in with the brush and do some of the leaves, but most of it can be done with these textures. Now I do some very, very light leaves reflecting the light. Green this time using the emerald and a little bit of white. And I'll add some yellow to that later on to make it even lighter. You see how we just can pick out some of the
very light highlights coming down from the sky. So move the sponge around, twist it to get it to give you an uneven pattern. You don't want penny a yard, as they say, in other words ribbon. It's got to be looking as if it's an individual touch all the time. You need to get back from it as well and be able to see it. So don't get up too close to your work all the time. Do stand back and have a little look. Right, I need to put some yellow into that now. So there's my colour. Take a little bit of lemon yellow and mix that in with it. And a bit of white again to keep it very light. And we end up with a slightly warmer, nice leafy colour look. Take it onto the sponge and we'll see if we can add that to it. There we are. That's going to give it a little more brightness again, spontaneity. Remember, what we're trying to do now is actually paint direct sunlight onto our picture. We're actually taking these little pieces of sunlight and placing them in as highlights to catch the light, the ends of the little twigs and branches in this lovely reflected. Okay, now we've done the techniquey bit with the sponges. Let's come back to the brushes. I'm going to take a little bit of Prussian, some of the dark mix we did earlier as well, and make my brush back into a blade again. And just look at these little areas like this where there may be just too much. But also, we're going to have to put in the little light leaves where they're required. Now, in this case, we want a little more chrome, more of the orangey greens. Nice and clean as actual leaves this time, so they look quite different to the marks of the sponge. I do love sunlight. I have a job to live without it. This is why I miss France. It does my arthritis good to have a bit of warmth and light as well. I think I suffer from SAD syndrome at times. In other words, I need the sunlight, light and colour to keep me cheerful and happy. As I was saying earlier about the rough against the smooth, the light against the dark, the cool against the warm, these larger leaves that I'm putting in now will enhance the smaller leaves. We're almost ready now to be looking at the warmer colours of the heathers. And talking of warmer colours, let's start looking at a few of those even in these branches here. And these little bits of red are very important because they're going to make things leap forward. They're going to come into the foreground of our picture. They're going to bring the eye, the colours forward and push the cools back. Now that very, very light pink I was talking about, we've also got some of that happening on the twigs. So I need to make a very, very light colour. And again, I've got to have just the right amount of tips on my brush to do this job. We need some very lights coming down through these twigs here, catching the sunlight. So I'm making my brush into a blade again and just finding where these little bits of light come down across the twigs here. The light's coming from the left, it seems, so our little lines need to be on the left as well. Lots of lovely detail in it. These little bits of light are coming down into other areas too. I think we're ready now for doing the heather. I'm going to need to mix these colours up. Again, I can do some with brush and I can do some with texturing. Now for this heather, these lovely pinks and so on, we've got our roses and cadmiums and purples to play with, and some of that's going to be have a little cream added to it as well. So let's just start mixing those up. I'll take my medium brush And we want to start with our body colour, which is white, because we want things to be fairly light on this. So I'll take some white. Need to keep this fairly clean. Let's start then with our darkest of these. Some of our darkest, there's such a lovely variety of colours here, isn't there? We've got the ordinary reds, we've got pinks, so we'll add a little bit of red to that white. That's quite a warm red, and remember that in every colour that we use there's a warm and a cool of it. So if it's a red, there can be a warm orangey red, or it could be a cooler, more rose red, like this one for instance. Now look, I'm going straight across to my rose without even cleaning the brush. I'm making a more rose. We can go stronger and stronger with that. It is just almost entirely rose. We can go into more purple with it. Let's take that into the white there, just to show you what we can do. And a more cooler of the reds, rose. So now we've got the very orangey ones down towards a more cooler. We can take a more purple still. You see the difference in those from cool round to warm. So that just gives you an idea, even with those colours, what we can do. Now if I want to go warmer still, I could take that cadmium and put a little bit of orange with it and go even more orangey, and I could go warmer still there by adding more yellow to it and becoming much more yellow. Put more white in there, and now you can see all this range of these colours here happening down in our palette. So by using my sponge and these various colours, right through to the pure red straight off the palette. Right, just for the moment, to give you an idea, let's look at this area here. Take a little bit of my sponge, fairly fine bit at the moment, and we'll look at a cooler red for a start. And start to put those bits of heather in. How beautifully they show. Little highlights coming through. And we'll move to a slightly lighter one. Right through here. We'll take a little bit of white and mix it in with it. Actually on the palette, come back into that. We get these lovely heather effects. Very simply done, and it looks like we spent hours and hours doing it, but we know we haven't. You know I haven't. You've been watching what I've been up to. Cheating. Back to the pinks again down here. And let's put some actual almost pure colour on there now. Let's take some of the rose and work into the background here. And that gives you an idea. I'll just carry on like that. Don't overdo it, just find your colours. And I'm not just pressing, I'm dragging slightly at the same time on many of these, just to get a slight feeling of the bristles of the twig-like structures of the heathers as well. Going straight onto my palette now to take the reds off. Done my mixing, so I'm starting to use more pure colour. Right up to these flame reds. Wonderful flame reds here. God knows what it is, but some of these colours, you'd almost think they've been planted in a garden, they're so lovely. And how they leap out at us in the front, in the foreground here. Now I'm actually going back to some ultramarine and some cobalt because we need to play the cools against the warm still. So I'm going to bring in the texturing of the blues and the cools into here as well. Mustn't forget they still exist. They will help to make the warm seem warmer. And we come with areas of blue into this as well, which also links with the blues in the background so that we have colours coming through everything. Lots of lovely texture then.
In many ways I've almost finished this painting, but I've got more animals and things I want to put into it. I want to put some grass into it yet. But I want to finish off here now, not with the sponge, but with my brush. Finally, I want the brush strokes to be slightly different as well, and this is another reason. I'm not just I'm saying it a little bit tongue-in-cheek, but I do want to make it look as if it's not just sponge work textures, but just as I want them in a different way. Got a lovely abstract quality to this area now. I'm going to go back to some of the ordinary gold to link with the background. I'm putting in a bit of yellow ochre. Just ordinary yellow ochre, not chrome yellow or anything fancy, just to link with some of our yellow ochres in the background. Really get this effect of sunlight. So we're coming to the end of just how painting the background, the basics. Blodgy, so we just have to do a bit more work in it. Bring it back again. More texture there, here and there. Right, next is to look at how to paint the birds in. We would like some grouse, I would like some grouse in there. So I think what we may do now is play on the computer a bit, but let's take a closer look at the painting before we go on. The sorts of texture that we've now created. I feel the background is almost done. I say almost because I'd like to bring out a highlight, I think. What I haven't done here is used a cream using lemon yellow. Now we've used the yellow ochre, which is fine, and we can normally get away with that with this guy, but I think it would be nice to just try a slightly lighter cream. So I need to mix a little bit of white with a touch of lemon yellow, a little bit more light across those clouds coming up through here. One of the reasons I want to do that is because I'd like to get a bit more light shining across the water as well. Now, having got that, we need to reflect that slightly here in the water, I think, and some slightly lighter bits of this cream amongst these bits of heather as well. Right, I think it's time we look now at the birds, if we're going to put them in. And the first thing is to decide just where they're going, and for that I'll mix up a little bit of dark, just a bit of burnt umber and ultramarine, very thinly to draw with. So I can get rid of it if I have to. Now I want to be dividing the painting up into quarters, so halfway, quarter, just about right there. Right, that's mapped out where I want the birds to go. Now we've got to paint them in more detail. Now the way I'm going to paint these, see the small brush to the end again, is to block in my mid-tones first, and the whole of the grass here, this area, can be painted mainly in a very deep purple brown. I think we'll get away with Indian red. I'm going to add a little bit of rose to that. Might be two strange colours to use, but give me a very rich, deep, orangey, purpley red there.
And then I'm going to paint darker into that to give it a glow. There's a lighter area going on there. This comes right up under the wing here, around and under there. I'm going to just let that dry on there and give me a nice glow to that purple. And I'm going to add blue into that in a minute to really, some red coming around there to really give it some life. Right, now I want to come up into the head here. A bit of warmth into that bit of wing there. While I've got that colour on my brush, I want it somewhere else. I need it across here on this bird. This very warm colour will also help to bring these birds forward into the picture, hoping to give them almost a three-dimensional look. Give this picture much more depth. Not that it hasn't got enough, but it'll give it even more. Round into there. Some of that warmth coming into this bit of wing as well. Don't want too much back there, be careful. Just sharpen it up again in a minute. In fact, I'll try and lift that off now. I just don't want that staining there. There we go. So we can use it almost like watercolour and lift it off with the terps. But it's acrylic underneath, you see. It's squarish across the head. Now, a little bit bluer up there. Take some cerulean blue. Even the smallest of marks now that are wrong can mess things up, so I've got to remove anything that isn't quite right. So we've done some darks, but we can go darker yet. A bit more terps. Got to get this, because I'm doing very fine work now, I have to have it just the right consistency. I might have to go a little bit lighter in between later to make that stand out a bit more. So we're going to carry on with this bird now, and we'll work in some of the lighter colours now. Let's go towards this very light, almost pink. It's coming into the wing just down here. It's nice that because this is acrylic and dry, although there's a bit of oil over it, I can rest my hand actually on here. I should make this a bit lighter in a moment. I'm just doing the first coats for the minute. Just tickling in these feathers. Just get this feathery feel by flicking the brush around here. Right along the front edge of the wing. Quite important. Catching that sunlight as well, which is important. I'm able to rest my finger against the painting here at the minute just to get these lighter details done. And while I've got that on my brush, we'll look at the little bits of light reflected on. The same over here. This is where my arm starts to hurt because I can't keep it up for this long with the arthritis. And I'm able to rest against the painting, but I would have to use my other hand to hold this arm up otherwise. So it's limited the amount of time I can actually paint and keep my arms up. And that bird is almost there as simply as that. Well, I'll put a little bit of green to it yet. Same stronger blue to come into here now. Now, we need some of the warmer colours. I've got to come back to this gold. And I'm going to start again with the yellow ochre, but very quickly come back to now a bit of cadmium orange. Let's see what that can do. A little bit of cadmium orange and cadmium yellow just to make it a bit lighter, because we've got this beautiful jewel-like quality here, and I want nice fresh paint for this. Little strokes of colour, which gives it that warmth to start dragging it forward. Now a little bit more of the yellow, a little bit of green now. And it's little things like this that can make your painting. As an impressionist, I'm used to looking for these sorts of colours, so it's possibly a fraction easier for me in that way. And I can lift away paint so I can get a slightly more feathery effect here of that bird
by lifting away some of this paint and just cutting into these edges with some terps on the brush. Now slightly darker cream in between the feathers here where it's showing a bit transparent. Back up here again, and we'll just try and find this brighter orange. A little bit of flame going on up there, the sunlight across the bird, to really try and just capture this effect of light. And you know those birds are almost there, aren't they? Just needs to be softened. A little bit of taps on the brush again. And we're going to look at this tail feather here. Well, I think we're about there with that. Don't want to make that too much brighter. So, here's our finished work then. Do a large one of the series of textured panels. We've just finished the winter one, and now I'm going to move on to a summer flowers, one in the gardens here. Okay, I'm going to start on this large piece in the series of the large textural semi-abstract configurative pieces. This is the garden one. Drawing, you can see I've got basically worked out, and I want to start building up textures, at first with seeds and then with card and then filler and so on. Use a bit of tissue on the flowers as well. So I'm going to start building up into 3-dimension. I'm going to be using the centre of these sunflowers first of all, and finding seeds that will mimic the seeds of the sunflower in the middles. So I've got my beans here that I think would be about the right size for these seeds for sunflowers, we'll see. And I put PVA glue in, hopefully mix them all up together, and then put them in the middle of my sunflowers. I hope we've got enough. If not, we'll make some more. And of course a lot of this work is experimental, which is the fun for me. If I knew exactly what was going to happen all the time, I wouldn't be able to bother anything. I get a bit bored. Now I'm cutting up pieces of mount card for the petals. I shall cut these strips into smaller rectangles, and once those are done I'll cut those down yet again into the petal shapes by rounding them off and also going a bit thinner at the ends, like that and that. So a lot of work, but hopefully worth it at the end. So rounding off the ends and then pointing slightly like that. All these little petals, and we're going to have a go at putting them on and around the sunflowers. One set slightly ahead of the others, so it'll be, I hope, something like this. I'll put them all the way around the outside first, like that.
And once we've got that lot done, because I want to leave the ends of them clear to lift and twist a bit, I shall go around the inside and place them over like that on the inside so that they're overlapping like fish scales. Right, you can see I've managed to do the cards for the flowers now. The flower petals are done, and I'm going to move on down the painting and we'll look at doing the figures here and here. That's this one here and Rosie over there. I don't want to build them up too much, just the hats and around the arms and the bodies and the hair a little bit. The faces I'll leave flat to actually paint. Then I've got my set of painting knives here. Painting knives are different to the palette knife. That's a painting knife, and you see it has a bend, an angle in the blade, so my fingers don't touch the canvas. Whereas this one is a palette knife, and possibly not quite so useful. I'll be using this one at first and a fine one. A mixture here of PVA glue and a little ordinary interior household filler, and I can apply that with my painting knife. We don't want to overdo this, but just to work up the hair and give some sort of texture and shape to it. It doesn't need to be that thick, it's more a matter of just getting edges and textures that matter. And that the forms raise one above another. So this shoulder is quite important. You can come round gently, get quite smooth edges for that, and then I can just bring it back smoothly, let the hair come down behind here, out into leaves or whatever for later. Forearm here, which comes up to her hand. We don't want a bunch of bananas there, but we can just get the feeling of the fingers by going 1, 2, 3, 4, and that will give us the feeling of those fingers there without too much detail. And across and into her chest. Really I just want to pick up edges as much as anything. We've got about half an hour with this stuff before it dries off. So, reasonable time to get things done. Just subtly building it up. Just got a sleeve across there. Just the front of her hair here, I think, to finish off. Do for the texturing of that. Might just bring a little texture around the face, a very small amount, just here back in the head, just over the drawing. Now I need to move across to the other side. And I need to build her up in the same sort of way. We'll start with the hat, just building it up around the outer edge. That come right the way around. Now you can see we're doing this with filler, but you could actually, if you were using oil paint, you could actually be building up the oil paint in the same sort of way, you know. Right round that bit of the hat there. Because it's got the glue in it, it's going to stick a bit better as well, and it makes it more flexible having the PVA glue amongst it too, so that it doesn't crack off as easily off if the canvas is bashed off the canvas. So we could actually have built, or could actually build the oil paint itself if we were painting with oil paint in the same way. Just finding these lines and edges is all I'm doing, and the rest I can do with the canvas. And this area for her chest is coming out slightly, so we'll make that a little bit higher, bring it up and out a bit more, giving the illusion of more form there. She's got some flowers in her hand here, which I'll just build up a bit as well. Now let's work on those hands. Not so easy. Did one just now, but fairly simply. In this case, we've got a finger here. There we go, that should give the feeling of that. I'll just come back to her arm here, and the sleeve there, building up and round. And just put a
a little bit onto their nose and just a small amount. Don't want to get into detail, I'll be building up the whole face. I can't get into that. Now there's fingers finally. Right, we can go straight into the flowers I think next. We want to start on the delphiniums. Delphiniums that are down here below her. Let's start building those up. Haven't needed a smaller, finer knife as yet. I might smooth those textures out just a little bit shortly. The first thing is to start working up these big delphiniums. Sort of shapes and textures that they are. Now I'm going to just put a layer onto them at the moment and then come back in and shape those in a moment. So just get it onto the canvas, put the canvas with some sort of texturing happening here, and then I'll redraw them in using more filler and using the knife. Lovely colours, flowers come all the way down through here, various delphiniums and foxgloves and all sorts of things. So now I've got plenty of filler, let's build them up. A lovely feeling we can get using the fillers. And again, if I was painting with oils and not doing the filler first, I'd be painting in the same sort of way with these painting knives. Building these things up. Yeah, then we've got some foxgloves we hit over there, let's find those. We need to model these foxgloves just here. And that shouldn't be too difficult. Not much filler left, I'll have to make some more in a minute, but it's easy enough to do. Take this one, and let's see if we can just use the end of that to put on little circles here. Yes, there we go, look. Different to the delphiniums. Same here. And you can see the different types of modelling that I'm doing here now. Now I just need to clean the bowl up a little bit. And I'm going to, while I'm doing the cleaning the bowl up, I'm going to add a little bit of water to what I've got. Just make a slightly thinner variety of that, because I want to put some over the sunflower petals. Right, what I want to try and achieve now is to work a little bit more on the sunflower petals and just try and get the feeling of these serrated edges on. I'm going to use a thin down mixture of the filler with more glue just to see if I can get this sort of feeling on the edges of the petals themselves, because they're too flat at the moment. There we go, look, that's rather nice. So by just brushing this on, I can get some surface texture on these petals, which should stay on and not crack off. I want to be able to bend these petals a bit later, so I'm just putting it on and dragging it outwards with the tip of the brush to give a textural feel to the surface of the petals. They've only just dried, so I can't do too much work yet. The colour's on. And I was thinking of doing these petals in acrylic ink, because they'll be very bright, and as it's all white at the moment, the colour should go on quite well, and then I might darken the background rather than darken everything this time. Gives quite a nice effect. We've got to experiment and try all these things out. Needs must, and I always say it's like compound interest. That when you've done something once, you can use it again somewhere else. There's a butterfly down here. We don't want to make that too thick and heavy, so I'm going to do the same thing again and build up with the brush and model his body just a little first. The body could have been a thicker medium. Just build that up. More importantly was to get the wings. Try and get some sort of texture, which I could use tissue paper for as well, but let's get some sort of texture there for the wings and the wing edges. And the same is going on. And the peacock the other side, another butterfly to come on here yet. So we just want to model this butterfly here a little bit more, just to get those wings right into there, and we can take some of the filler away and use that actually for making the body. So we'll pick that up from there, put it back onto here. The filler's just starting to set, so that's quite handy. There we go, we start to get the feel of that wing. And then we mix for the next flowers. We have some lilies to make. Well, you can see I've now textured across a lot of this area. It's still quite damp, and I'm going to continue building up these lilies and other flowers. We next will have a go at the roses. First of all, I've got to get it to stick. I'm going to just build straight up on the surface, just get the whole piece covered. I could try and work on the individual petals, but I think it's going to be better to just get it sticking first of all. And then once I've got a coat on, I'll be able to build it up. Areas of it. It's quite fun doing this. I wouldn't be doing it otherwise, I suppose, would I? In fact, I've got that a little bit wrong because that comes higher here. And the second petal that comes out here. Back in again. And we've almost got our rose formed there. Leaving the sunflower shapes, I next paint the whole surface with black acrylic paint to give it a good primer. Then I worked yellow acrylic ink onto the sunflowers and then started to paint in the yellow acrylics over the top. Orange show through from underneath. I really want this to be a lot lighter on top, so I can just bring that yellow across the top of these. I used chrome yellow first of all, then a mixture of lemon yellow and cadmium orange, and then back to chrome yellow again, which allowed the cadmium orange colour to show through. I have to bring even more over yet because this acrylic paint is just not heavy enough to really pick up the bright yellows that I want. Now with the second coat of yellow on, with the orange just glowing through, you see it's starting to look far more effective and much more like the sunflower petals that we were after. So it's had about 4 coats. It's had the acrylic ink, it's had the cadmium yellow acrylic, and then it's had some lemon yellow and cadmium orange, and now it's having the chrome yellow again to finish off. Just letting the orange glow through places and at edges. Then I want to do the dark centre of the sunflower, so I'm going to make it quite thin and may even use some more inks to drop in there, some very deep purple ink. And just water it down a bit to really settle in there. Now I want to drop in some acrylic ink into the middle of these. I'm going to put in some deep purple and some crimson and a little bit of blue later on. I'm going to thin it down slightly. A wash of this acrylic ink into the centre. Across and letting the yellow just glow through. So I'm letting this darker colour drop into the recesses of the seeds, leaving it lighter on top. I'm going to go much darker yet as well. This is just to get a base coat glowing in there. Go darker still, so I'm going to take some very deep blue. Right, well there we have our finished sunflowers at this stage of things. You can see I've put in the colour washes into the centre, some very deep blues and purples and some red over the top, leaving one sunflower completely yellow with a little tint of the reds and darks into it. So now we move on to the next stage. Well, I've redone the yellows on here. I might do a couple more coats yet in places later on just to tidy it up. And now I've started painting the 2 portrait areas, building up these lights and darks And lovely sunlit effects here gradually build up this impression of these colours. We'll come across to the other side now. And you can see the figure slightly in relief there. Just glazing over the top of the black at first. If you see colours elsewhere, we've got to get them in now. So if I do see some warm going on out there, I'll put it in now. Gradually mixing up the colours as I go along, testing them out, trying them out, seeing which is warmer and which is cooler. Once we've got those established, we can start to see where they are more. There's a bit more mauve coming down, reflected light in there. Hopefully we can establish this with fairly simple colouring. And coming down that side of the face, it's a lot more orange. Into the neck the same. You've got to look for these colours. And then it's quite cool. So we've got the blues coming in here. Certainly on the neck just there, into the eye there. That way we haven't got to paint too much detail as well, quite handy. Cobalt blue, whack it on. Trouble is painting in between these puddles. These are rather fun colours.
Good blue there, really lovely colour.
Cobalt and then some ultramarine on top. we've got to make larger changes in paintings and take a risk as well. I still feel that this painting is in two halves, it's almost two paintings, and this is distracting here much as I like it. So I'm going to take a chance and paint her out, leaving the texture there, and take some of these delphiniums across into here to give a more distant feel to the garden there. There's enough with that figure there, so let's have a go at that. And I'm going to green her out totally and take a look at putting delphiniums into there and knocking it right back. Just don't think she works. It's a shame to have done all that effort, but on the other hand, if something isn't working in a painting, then it's best to make those changes. Now really that takes our concentration back more to there. There is room for a few daisies even if I want them now, I suppose. Which I didn't have before, which is an idea, because I did want some daisies. It's certainly bringing it back to that figure again. I think it's already getting more of a coherence now. At least I sincerely hope I got it right now for changing it. There we are. It's balancing out better now, I think. Right, now we'll go back to the reds. What I'd like to just experiment with now is just trying just a few little daisies down into here and drag it forward again by putting a warmer colour here to the foreground and linking it together. Well, I consider this work finished now. I can't varnish yet because it's a little bit wet and I want to photograph. But it's been fun. It's an unusual piece, perhaps a little twee, but it's one of the series where I wanted to show all the different ways of life here, the lifestyle, the atmosphere, the charisma of Lincolnshire and this little area I live. So we've got the beach in summer, we've got the beach in winter, we've got spring that we've sold already, the woodland one, and we've got my spring one with the playing with textures anyway, playing with colour, playing with mood, and just having fun really. Let's take a look now at the textures in the picture. See where I've used the seeds and the sunflower and the pieces of cards. I built up the roses and the figure. And the yellow roses there. Down to the smooth area of the butterfly. Just a little bit of texturing just to find edges. Not too much.